Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast, bringing you today's labor news, some labor history and analysis, as well as interviews. Today, we have a pretty cool interview to present to you. We are interviewing Katie Harris, Executive Vice President from the Vermont AFL-CIO. Really excited about this. The Vermont AFL-CIO recently passed a 10-point resolution, which I think is worth studying if you're in the labor movement. And we're going to talk to her about what's going on over there because it's quite inspiring and very relevant to today's labor struggle. I'm here today with Jerry, as usual, and Brian, as usual, and of course, Katie. And I'm going to pass it over to Brian.
All right. Well, solidarity, everybody. It's good to hear and see everybody tonight. Katie, thanks a lot it's a great honor for us to come, for you to come on the show today. Been doing a lot of great work up in Vermont with labor and other activities. We really appreciate that. And so just wanted to start by asking you your background and why you got involved in labor. And now you're the Executive VP of the Vermont AFL-CIO. So maybe just a little background for our listeners and whatever you'd like to say. Thanks.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I started out, I moved to Vermont about 2.5 years ago now. And I wound up working for a unionized designated agency for health and human services, sort of. It's called Howard Center in Burlington, where we do a lot of mental health support services, along with substance abuse services and developmental disability services as well. I work there as a behavioral interventionist. And so I work out in public schools across the county in the Burlington area. So one of the main reasons that I took that job was because it was unionized, right? Knowing that I would have job security, predictable pay raises and things like that. But I didn't get heavily involved until COVID hit, which was about 4 months or so after I took this position. And that's when I really realized how much I needed to lean on my union in order to navigate the complexities and the uncertainties of working in a pandemic. We were furloughed for a good at least month and a half or so. And after that, work was really scary, right? We didn't have masking mandates right away. We weren't sure if there was going to be a vaccine or when that was going to be happening. And in order to keep our jobs, we had to work face to face. That's the core of what we do. And so through asking for help from my union in navigating the treacherous world of unemployment, that's when I realized I had to do my part in ensuring that our union remained strong and was able to help others and kind of pay it forward. So that's how I became involved in my local, which is also a part of the Vermont AFL-CIO. So later that year is when the Labor Council, the Vermont AFL-CIO, had a vote. I believe it was our convention was happening virtually that year because of the pandemic. And I was asked to serve as a delegate for my local AFSCME 1674 to vote on whether or not we would authorize a general strike in the event that Donald Trump refused to leave office in January of 2021, right? And so that was my first taste of getting involved in the Labor Council itself. And from there, our union membership has more than doubled since I had become involved. And I think that really kind of caught the eye of the Labor Council itself too. We've started out with about 16 or 17% membership at our local, and in the last couple of years, we are up to over 40%, which is a huge gain. And And we're working really hard in our local to ensure that we get something that's called fair share or agency fee, where the majority or of all our bargaining unit members would pay some type of a fee in order to support our union, so that we can continue to grow and we can continue to defend the rights of all the workers at our workplace. So I guess it was the following year that I was elected as vice president for AFSCME on the executive board for the Vermont AFL-CIO. And then this last convention, we had a vacancy in the executive vice president role. And so I was nominated back in August of this year as vice president for the executive board.
All right. Well, congratulations. Fantastic. And actually, that was going to be one of my first questions to expand. That's what really brought our attention. And following Vermont union work for, and a variety of other activities over the years, Milk for a Dignity campaign, the Vermont Workers Center. But when we saw the resolution for the general strike, we were intrigued by this because that is a very bold move in U.S. labor. So could you speak to more to that? You said there was a resolution passed by the Vermont AFL-CIO that if Trump attempted a coup, that the suggestion of the Vermont AFL-CIO would be that membership should enact a general strike. Can you speak more to that, please?
Sure. We felt that it was the right thing to do, and the least that we could do, right? We took steps to prepare for this strike in concrete ways in 3 communities in Burlington, Montpelier, and Bennington. We did so by opening discussions with elected and appointed leaders in these communities, seeking to achieve coordination and mutual support for pending strike actions. The most advanced efforts were in Burlington, where we helped elect a majority of the city council, where the Democratic Socialist Vermont Progressive Party was the largest party on the council. And here we coordinated and planned with the progressives.
Fantastic. Was there any response nationally that you received from that resolution?
Oh yeah, we actually we got into some trouble with the national AFL-CIO. I'm not sure if you're aware of that as well, but we had lost our solidarity grant initially, and we were under investigation for a little while with the national, which is the right type of trouble to be in. I From what I understand, it was sort of against their national rules, but we stood firm and we did what we needed to do.
Mhm. Right on.
Yeah, right
Well,
on.
in tandem, yeah, that's right. So in tandem with that, I'll just ask this last question. It's kind of all like a 3-part question. Sorry, Rick and Jerry.
Oh no,
So
do your thing.
yeah, so what I'd like to kind of what we're following, y'all, really paying close attention to some of the work you're doing because it's in some ways there's a great legacy of this, especially in a CIO in the 1930s, but really in the present day, in the past decades, this kind of activity that y'all are doing has been somewhat rare. Not it's been happening in various places, but it seems that the Trump general strike resolution also kind of stood in similarity to the one of your planks, and correct me if I'm reading this wrong, but the planks of the platform that y'all have is that it's an anti-fascist, anti-racist plank. There is a part in there that says that if it's found out to be any member of the Federation is engaging in racist activities or chauvinist activities, that they could be expelled from the Federation. And we found that also intriguing as well. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So we amended our Vermont AFL-CIO Constitution in 2020 and removed the language that barred communists from being part of the Vermont AFL-CIO and replaced it with language that bars fascists and racists from being in leadership positions. And this was done by a 2/3 plus vote of our delegates. We've also chartered an anti-fascist motorcycle club, which is called the Green Mountain Riders, who have done security work as sergeant at arms at our last 2 conventions. And so the biggest fascist threat was the Trump coup And there were only the state labor council. We were the only state labor council in the nation to authorize a general strike if there was not a transfer of power. So I think we've put it in our constitution, and we've really lived it.
That's what's up. That is long overdue, man, and very inspiring. That's so cool. Brian, do you have another question or?
Well, it's kind of segueing into another, but similar area. I think maybe this might have been added to your platform, or you raised this in one of the items you wrote recently, in terms of the reproductive justice as a working class women's issue and a poor woman's issue as well. And there's been various debates about the situations we're in about this, in terms of the response sometimes is the way we're going to get out of this is vote, and of course we all respect the right to vote and the right to vote, uh, but also in terms of having this as working class women's issue, other tactics arise, such as, well, we could also strike, or we could also do some other direct actions as well. And I think there was a piece that you wrote that either alluded to this or stated this in some ways very strongly. So would you expand on that, please?
Sure. So, I think that we see abortion access as a labor issue because we live in a country where paid parental leave is a luxury, right? It's not a given or a guarantee. Where the cost of medical care is astronomical. Even the cost of labor and delivery is uh, uh, is insane, right? We don't have any subsidized childcare. We abortion restriction is a working class emergency, right? We we also live in a country where student debt is absolutely crippling, um, and so we take the stance that, like, any attack on bodily autonomy is an affront to the very idea that we live in a society which values personal liberty and the collective rights of all classes above that of the ruling few. So, as labor leaders, we need to sound the alarm and fight back. This is not just a women's issue. This is very much a working class issue. We understand that the folks who are going to be most impacted by abortion restrictions are the working class and the poor. It's not going to be the bosses and the CEOs and those in power who have access to the means to travel, to pay for whatever procedures that they need, any type of healthcare that they need. It is going to be the people who are working, and so that's why we see it as a working class issue. And um, so what we've been doing is a lot of campaigning for the Reproductive Liberty Amendment in Vermont. So currently, we are going to be voting in November on Article 22, which will be codifying our current reproductive rights into our state's constitution. In addition to that, we're also fighting for shield laws so that telemedicine doctors can prescribe abortion pills as necessary out of state, um, and ensuring that other states don't get to dictate how it is that we protect our residents here in Vermont and the doctors that we have here in Vermont as well. And I
Sure,
have to look up the wording, but we did just pass a resolution in our last convention, declaring abortion rights as workers' rights, and some of the language at the end of it was pretty telling to where we stand as a labor council, and more specifically as United, which is our slate that's been kind of running the executive board of the Vermont AFL-CIO since 2019, and that's what's really set our labor council in a much more progressive and leftist direction. So let me take a moment to look that up really quick so I can find the correct wording. Because we did have some pushback during our um, discussion before voting for this resolution that was pretty interesting during our convention. During the very end of our Abortion Rights Are Workers' Rights resolution, we have let it be further resolved that the Vermont AFL-CIO calls on all affiliates and all unions to commit resources to further organizing healthcare workers and protecting currently organized healthcare workers in their collective bargaining agreements so that they may continue to offer essential healthcare services such as abortions, regardless of any unjust rulings and laws. And let it finally be resolved that should at any time an abortion ban be enacted on a federal scale, one that circumvents the democratic autonomy of Vermont, the Vermont AFL-CIO shall not recognize the legitimacy of such an anti-democratic law and shall diligently work to undermine, circumvent, and resist such oppression without limitations and without regard for legality.
Right on. So this segues, I think, into also Jerry was raising this before about you've done some work with Cuba, and they just passed or in the process of the family code there. And would you expand maybe on some of your experiences in Cuba or talking to Cuban leadership or delegates, and the contrast to that in the United States on what you just read as opposed to what we're seeing happening in Cuba with the family code and other um, policies and laws that have been enacted there, where healthcare is right for the people.
Right. So that's just like a huge contrast from what we see in the United States, um, a country that likes to portray Cuba as a dictatorship where the people don't have any sort of fundamental rights. And we live in a country where it's a luxury to have healthcare, and a healthcare that's determined by your individual employer. That you must be working in order to be able to access basic healthcare. Whereas in Cuba, healthcare is a universal right for every single person there, no matter what. Um, Even having a job is a right for all people in Cuba. And in Cuba, they've just passed the new family code, which replaces the one from 1975. Um, Essentially, what it does is it has totally turned the patriarchal idea of family upside down, right? So it has laid out the legal rights of families, of children, of people who would like to have children, whether through surrogacy or otherwise. It has enacted many new rights for the concept of marriage. It's a new concept of family, the role of grandparents, and other types of unions besides marriages. They also have the rights of children, of raising children by any type of family. Um, and it's what I thought was like most fascinating about this, in contrast to the United States, is that I believe when I was in Cuba, um, I think they were on like the 23rd draft of the family code, right? So they've had, I believe, over 8,000 different meetings across the island of everyday, day to day people discussing and debating the family code, coming up with constant updated versions of what it is that they would like to see, and engaging in, I think, the best example of what we would consider democracy, right? Of direct democracy, of people being able to get together to discuss with their neighbors the laws that they would like to see in place. Um, and they spend so much time discussing and debating in all of these small meetings that they've designed a family code that has totally, uh, I think, set the example for what could be, right? Um, what I find so exciting is that there is a possibility of what could be, right? in the United States, it's nothing like what we see here, where we oftentimes have people in power that we aren't even familiar with that are representing us. We don't know all the time what laws are being passed that directly affect us. We don't get to have a say directly in the decisions that affect our day-to-day lives. Whereas in Cuba, it's entirely different. It's really exciting, and it's also it definitely shines a light on the hypocrisy of the United States as like the symbol of democracy, which is clearly not.
And we're seeing it playing out right before our eyes today, right? With Hurricane Ian, people here are just told, you're on your own. You can evacuate, and we'll see you later. Have a good life. Not having any protection at all from the government. And in Cuba, again, like with healthcare, it's the exact opposite. Did you traveled to Cuba, I think, and you have any other comments about what your experience in Cuba?
Um, sure. I mean, I was there for the May Day parade, which was incredible. So I think like several million people were marching that day, and we also had the opportunity to visit some of the neighborhoods where the Cuban government is investing a lot of funds and resources to revitalize. So neighborhoods that were previously uh, made up of tents and barely even shacks, the poorest of the poorest neighborhoods that the government has decided and has made sort of their mission to focus on the people in the neighborhoods that are the poorest and need the most. So these neighborhood revitalization projects are led by the people who live there. They design neighborhoods around local community uh, healthcare clinics where they have a community doctor that can go from door to door, or you can go because it's walking distance from your house. There are schools that are based strategically within these neighborhoods, so it's designed in a way that everyone who lives in that neighborhood has access to their very basic community resources. And along with the rebuilding of actual homes, it's the neighbors and the people who are living there who are engaging in the work of building their homes in their neighborhood. And at the end of um, a home being built, that person receives the title for that home, right? So under socialism, I think homeownership is kind of a it was something that I was curious about. But there is very much a lot of people who own their own homes, and after these projects are done, they're able to sell their home, to pass it on to their kin, and to do whatever it is that they would like to do with them. But it also makes sure that there are homes for everyone. There is very little homelessness, if at all. There's very little unemployment in Cuba. So it kind of goes to show that like neighborhoods can be designed in thoughtful ways that support everyday working people, and providing them with the resources that they need to be healthy and to live dignified lives, which is again something that we don't see in the United States, right?
Right.
Yeah, Cuba has a lot of very inspiring things about it. I remember when I was there, I didn't know much about inner city gardens at the time, but I did see them, and then it kind of hit me. I'm like, okay, they have this like big old farm in the middle of the city. What's going on here? And then I came back to the States and I learned about the special period during the 90s, where Cuba struggled with petroleum and petroleum for the tractors, petroleum products for pesticides and stuff like that. So everything had to agriculture had to come into the city, and one of the end products of that is that it's organic food that they're growing there. It's affordable, and it's being grown within blocks of your home, so it doesn't have to be transported this long distance. And that never left me. that was a lesson that obviously I'm carrying till today and sharing with y'all. But also, yeah, I remember walking around and there was some kind of race happening, some kind of political race happening in Cuba, and I remember seeing the flyers on some of the some of the street lights and whatnot, and they were just very basic. They had the candidate's name and just where they stood on all the different issues that affected the community, what their ideas were, what their solutions were, what they thought. And yeah, I couldn't, it was nice. It was refreshing. It was grounding. It was very human. It was democratic, if you will, to see that sort of thing. So thank you for sharing, your observations in Cuba and your, your experiences there.
Yeah. So I don't know if Jerry, you have anything to add, but one of the slogans that we uphold here at We Rise Fighting is there are no borders in the workers' struggle. And Rick does great speeches on this topic in terms of combating the chauvinism sometimes of, buy in America or made in the USA and this type of thing, as opposed to not being pitted against our fellow workers around the world. And, just talking about Cuba and the lessons we're learning, and you just taught us about Cuba. Do you have any comments about that slogan, "No borders in the workers' struggle," or just working to build unity and solidarity with workers around the world? It seems like some of the work you're doing in Vermont is very oriented to that as well, Katie.
Right. I think in short that capital is international, right? So the labor movement must also be international. And I think as far as class goes, class is borderless, right? We are all the working class. Um, and so when it comes to showing solidarity to our fellow workers, it is borderless. There are no borders to working class solidarity, right? An injury to one is an injury to all. Um, so that's why we have focused on anti-imperialism, on internationalism as a union, as a labor council. Um, we understand that the struggles of workers across the ocean are the same struggles that we face as well, and we can also learn a lot from each other, right? Like Cuba is a really good example where their trade unions is very much part of their government, right? They have actual government positions that the union's voice is there at the table. The working class voice is there at the table. Um, and so we have a lot to learn from each other, and we have a lot to be able to share in our collective struggle.
Hey, Kate, I've got a question for you. Well, actually, it's two questions. How are your all's relations with the New Hampshire and Vermont state feds? How would you characterize them? And as part of that, are you aware of there's going to be a national call for demonstrations uh, opposing the war in Ukraine, the proxy war, as it is called in the call for the demonstrations, and in Ukraine, and a call for negotiations. Think there's any possibility of interest in those three states? But I did want to ask you first how your relations are with those two state feds,
So you said New Hampshire and who else?
and in New Hampshire and Maine. Yeah.
So I know that we've done some organizing trainings with the Maine AFL-CIO, or Maine Labor Council. I'm not familiar with the dynamics around the New Hampshire Labor Council. So if you know something, please please share. But I'm unfamiliar with that. As far as talks about opposing the war in Ukraine, I am a little unfamiliar at this point. Is that something you could tell me more about?
Well, I guess it's coming from something called UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition. I think it's fair to say it's probably the only remaining significant anti-war coalition on the left that we've got these days. So if it's okay with you, I'll just send you some information about it. But it's just a call for October 15th. I think a week of actions on October 15th, just to sort of get the left a little exercised about the war that's going on, and the deaths, and the $60 billion that's going into it, and the seemingly endless war that is going on. So with your consent, I'll send you some information on it, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would really appreciate that. I mean, I think that our firm stance against fascism is clear. Um, the capitalist class using war as a means to profit is also something that we're very, very much against. Um, so yes, thank you for passing that along.
You're welcome.
All right. If I may, Katie, in preparation for talking with you, I went on the Vermont AFL website and checked out that 10-point program. And that's cool, man. And for the benefit of our readers, I'm just going to bullet point it real quick so they know what this 10-point program looks like. Basically, it calls for union democracy, working class unity, states very boldly we are anti-fascist, provides some ideas for social programs such as a $15 minimum wage, affordable housing, healthy locally produced food, provides ideas on a Green New Deal, talks about electoral politics and how an endorsement of a Democratic candidate isn't just a given anymore. Talks about working class democracy, prioritizing organizing new shops, not being afraid to strike, and building just a more powerful labor movement all around. Now, this is really inspiring, and for our listeners, this is right on the main page of the Vermont AFL-CIO. So please do take a minute to check it out. But can you speak to this a little bit, like where this came from, how this has landed with members, how just anything? Give us some context how this 10-point program has hit.
Okay, so I think that when the United Slate came into the fold for the Vermont Labor Council, we very much wanted to prioritize some basic values, such as being anti-fascist, being progressive, as well as focusing on our rank and file membership, right? So organizing the actual workers, the rank and file who make up our entire membership. We have also focused on union democracy and increasing the number of delegates that we've allotted to each of the locals at our conventions to ensure that our rank and file has a voice and a seat at the table, and ensuring that their thoughts and values and ideas are heard in the direction that we want to go as a labor movement in Vermont. And I think because of this, it has been widely supported by our membership of the Labor Council. I believe that the United Slate was elected across the board for our executive council in 2019, and that goes to show the sentiment of the overall labor movement in Vermont, and realizing that workers' issues are incredibly important for sustaining an economy in Vermont. We also realize that the cost of living here is really high, and ensuring that the people who work here are able to live here and live a life in dignity. It shows our values here as a labor movement, and it's, I think, been received very, very well by the vast majority of our membership.
That's what's up. Cool.
So one of the platforms I think in there is the role of in the platform is the role of women in organized labor, and we've been seeing over the past, especially the past few years, women taking leadership roles such as yourself, and not just in organizational entities such as women auxiliaries in a union, but in real leadership positions such as presidents or vice presidents of locals, and a whole variety of other positions. Do you have any comment on that, Katie? In the recent years here, we're seeing that, and your comments and thoughts on that. Thanks.
For sure. So I'm president of local 1674 of AFSCME at my union now. So I'm also an example of a woman in a leadership position. It is very it's a tough gig, but what's really nice to see is that at our last convention, I remember walking in, and one of the first comments that I heard was from another member walking in and seeing, like, there are so many women here. This is a really nice change. Um, it's really great to see that women are being represented as part of the working class and maintaining or working class organizers, right? So being in leadership positions in the state labor council, we have several on our executive board, um, and seeing women get more involved too, right? In the process, where I think it's been seen as a very male dominated trades union type of thing. But when we look at the numbers, right, there are so many women that are in working class positions. So it's great to see more women get involved, to be able to see or hear the voices of a huge part of the working class really taking a step forward and taking on larger roles.
Another question for me, Katie. A few months ago, Brian shared something on Facebook. It was a picture of Liz Medina, the executive director of the Vermont AFL-CIO, speaking at the AFL-CIO convention in Philadelphia, and basically proposing the idea of having the AFL-CIO create an anti-fascist task force. Yeah, that's what's up. First of all, kudos to that. Hell yeah. Could you speak to what came of that, where that's at, the response to that, anything to that?
Well, first of all, Liz Medina is a badass. She is a incredible person and a driving force in our labor council. I unfortunately wasn't able to attend the national convention, but I heard that we made some waves there as well. I don't think that our resolutions that we had proposed got very far at the national, which isn't surprising. Um, I think that they didn't really come to the floor for a vote, from what I understand. I please correct me if I'm wrong, but we also had proposed a resolution to make the national elections more democratic, and that was also kind of swept under the rug as well. Um, but despite some of the more, I guess, contentious relationship that we've had with the national, we did receive some really great news in the last month that we are now going to have our solidarity grant from the national reinstated, which is awesome. And without any concessions, it just shows that when we stand firm with our values, that things will work out. And we stood firm, and we did not need to backtrack on any of the things that we've decided to stand for.
If I may too, thank you. If I may, just read a quick excerpt from something that Liz Medina said at the Philly convention of the AFL-CIO, because it's worthwhile, man. It's good stuff. Part of how she presented it, apparently, was fascism essentially is a way for the capitalist ruling class to maintain and expand their power over the working class, especially in times of economic crisis. We are currently in such a crisis. However, the fascist faction of the ruling class needs a large enough base to work for them in order to take control of the state and the means of production. white supremacy and racism is how fascists grow their base of support. Instead of economic concessions, fascists offer delusional and symbolic ones, such as false sense of racial superiority. I've never heard anyone say anything like that at no AFL-CIO. I'm sorry. Kudos to Liz Medina. Kudos to you for doing this work. And thank you for joining us here and being able to talk about this work because, man, I think that's part of the fruits of your labor, you know? Even when the resolution or something doesn't go all the way, you still generate a conversation and inspire people like us. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there for our listeners to get an idea of what Liz Medina said at the Philly AFL-CIO convention and proposing the idea of an anti-fascist task force. Comrades, further questions or Katie, comments?
I just said there were some real intriguing, as we could talk about this for a long time, and I would like to, but try to keep the shows to an hour. But one of the other program planks was, I'm from a certain state in the Midwest, and the two major tactics of labor for a long time has been lobbying or begging politicians to save us and spending a lot of dues money on that type of activity. I noticed in the also in the platform, as well as other places from the Vermont AFL-CIO, to start using that dues money increasingly for organizing. For example, I think one of the ideas y'all had was to take some of the, if possible, take some of the PAC money, political action contributions, and put that into member organizing, where executive council members or others on the board could go out and help a campaign from a union member of the federation, and help on a given union campaign, for example. And really dig into union organizing instead of just what I think some would deem as a waste of money, and politicians that don't really care about us are just doing lip service, but actually getting to the workers and building our bases of power, or as you said before, really in the work sites and in the shops and in our communities. Would you like to? I was intrigued by that, and I think I just wanted to ask a general question about that: is how that's moving? Is there conversations around that in terms of allocation of instituting, like, and institutionalizing some of these ideas on the ground, and making sure that money's being allocated in a way where we're actually building our power? So that's it.
Okay, well, so we continue to have a PAC, but right now that PAC is being used to launch some radio ads in support of the Abortion Rights Amendment, Article 22 in Vermont. But that said, when United took power in 2019, we took significant money out of our lobbying efforts and instead put it toward on-call organizers. Those organizers aided AFSCME Local 1674, United Academics in internal organizing, and other new organizing campaigns as well. So that is something that we are actively doing. Like I said earlier, we focus a lot on our rank and file membership, on our on the ground organizing efforts, and that's where we want to invest our resources and our time and our energy, is ensuring that the workers of Vermont have the resources to organize, and that the unions that are part of our labor council also have the means to expand and to win the fights that they take on in their workplaces.
So how can we learn more about the work that we're doing, Katie? Is what kind of, do you have, so like, what's your social media and your website, and if folks want to learn more about what we discussed today or just the work you're doing, and how to support it?
Sure. So we have a Facebook, Vermont State Labor Council. We also have a website that I will find the exact link to.
I'm going to encourage our listeners to go to the website and read that 10-point program. Read that 10-point program, talk about that 10-point program with your union brothers and sisters and other union members. Talk about that 10-point program at work. Just, it's good stuff. It's really inspiring.
Okay, and I'm happy to send you all some copies of our little green book that also has our 10-point program, our constitution, and the resolutions that we passed recently.
We would love that.
Great. And our website is vt.aflcio.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your time today. This has been a wonderful interview, and y'all are doing really incredible and inspiring and necessary stuff, kind of paving the road for the rest of us, hopefully, for other AFL-CIOs, for other unions, union members. Thank you, Brian and Jerry, always. We're going to wrap it up here. This is We Rise Fighting Labor podcast, the podcast you listen to with your fellow union member. And we will come back to you real soon with more labor news, analysis, history, all that jazz.